Collapse by definition is basically inflation or hyperinflation, which equals prices going up. Prices going up as a result of more money chasing the same goods and services. Remember, quantitative easing, or QE, is more money. Therefore, the more QE that we have, the closer the dollar is to collapsing. Step number 2, we've got to determine how much the Federal Reserve is actually printing. They just started QE4 in the repo market. If you haven't seen my video on the repo market, check that out. We'll put a link below. Short Reader's Digest version, we've got the repo market here. We've got Bank A, Bank B. Bank B needs liquidity. They need cash to meet their reserve requirements overnight. All they have is this collateral, usually treasuries. So Bank B will say, hey, Bank A, we'll give you these treasuries overnight if you give us the cash that we need. They go ahead and make that swap, and then they trade back the very next day or at the end of the contract, which can be 14 days to a month. But recently, the repo market froze. It shot rates way up to 10%, so the Federal Reserve had to come in. They had to start printing money to buy these assets and to provide liquidity for this repo market. But the moment they came out and did that, Jerome Powell went out to the media and he said, whoa, 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 time out, guys. Whatever you do, don't call this QE. This is by no means quantitative easing.
Is the Fed almost coming back into QE, or would you describe this intervention as something different?
Let's start there. This is not QE. In no sense is this QE. This is nothing like it all.
All this stuff that we're doing in the repo market, don't worry about that, because it is definitely not QE. But let me read you the definition of quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is an unconventional monetary policy in which a central bank purchases government securities or other securities from the market in order to increase the money supply. It goes on to say, quantitative easing increases the money supply by purchasing assets with newly created bank reserves, which means money, in order to provide the banks with more liquidity. That is the definition of quantitative easing. So what's the Federal Reserve doing right now? Oh yeah, they're printing money to buy assets to provide liquidity, but it's not quantitative easing. So going back to our original question, how much is the Fed printing? Over the last 7 weeks, they've printed $250 billion. Remember, guys, to answer the question, did the Federal Reserve just start the dollar collapse? We got to figure out the total amount of money that will be printed versus goods and services. We've answered how much. Now we need to answer how fast is the Fed printing. And this is step number 3. Over the past 7 weeks, again, they've printed $250 billion. Quantitative easing 3, back in the good old days where they'd actually admit that they were doing QE, was $40 billion a month. Quantitative easing 2, QE2, was $75 billion a month. Now they're printing $35 billion per week. That's a huge increase in the velocity. So not only are they printing a lot more money, they're printing it a hell of a lot faster. We now understand how much the Federal Reserve has printed. We understand how fast they've been printing. The next question, step number 4, is how long will the Federal Reserve continue to print? In September, when they started QE4 to bail out the repo market, Powell came out and said, oh, don't worry about this. This is only a temporary glitch. We're just doing this a couple days to fix this, and then everything will go back to normal. Nothing to see here. Since then, currently it's in November, they haven't stopped. Let's go back to 2009 when Ben Bernanke started quantitative easing. Here's a quote I want to read to you. Clearly, this is a temporary measure which is intended to provide support for the economy in this extraordinary period of crisis. And when the economy is back on the road to recovery, we will no longer need to have those measures. In other words, we'll stop QE. And remember, Janet Yellen tried to make quantitative easing less permanent when she started QT, which is just doing the opposite. It's shrinking the Fed's balance sheet. And she said that that would be like watching paint dry, meaning it would be very boring, it would be very smooth, no problem. Powell reiterated that when he started to increase interest rates and continue the quantitative tightening program, saying that it would be on autopilot. And notice he says they wouldn't do QE again unless there was a negative shock to the economy. And this is why he can't admit that he's doing QE now, because if he did, he'd be admitting there was a negative shock to the economy. This would destroy confidence, which would bring down the economy even further. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now that's completely reversed with this new round of QE4, and they're starting to increase their balance sheet again. Answering the question, how long will they print? My answer would be a long, long time. A better question is, will the Federal Reserve ever stop printing money? Our economy is based on assets, debt, and confidence, which has to have QE or money printing to survive. The Fed knows this. They know that that's what the economy is dependent on. And this is why they constantly lie to us. They always say that there's no problem, we're never going to have a recession, all is good. They know that's not true, but they know if they say anything else, it'll destroy confidence, which will destroy asset prices. The whole thing comes tumbling down. This is also why they always move the goalposts on us. When they first came up with this inflation targeting, their target was 2%. They wanted to get 2% inflation. The reason they gave us is because they were scared that inflation would go negative, causing deflation. Now, all of a sudden, it's not that they want 2% inflation, that they want to have an average of 2% inflation, meaning that inflation could go to 3, 4, 5, 6% for a period of time, and they wouldn't care as long as the average is 2%. Well, if inflation is at 5 or 6%, and they don't care because the average still hasn't gone over 2%, what on earth does this have to do with inflation going negative? The answer is nothing. It has zero to do with it, and the Federal Reserve is just changing the goalposts, and they're doing this in order to create cover so they can continue the money printing and the quantitative easing. And what proves this is every single time that they start to raise rates or stop doing quantitative easing, they always have to stop, lower rates again, and start printing more money. Back in 2009, again, when Ben Bernanke was telling us this was only temporary, now we've got Fed officials coming out and saying that quantitative easing is now a permanent tool. They're actually admitting that. And they change the rules so frequently for inflation. Inflation could go up to 5, 6, 10, 15%, and I guarantee you they will come up with another excuse to print more money and keep interest rates artificially low because they know that they don't have a choice. We know the dollar collapse comes as a result of printing more and more money chasing the same amount of goods and services. So we've answered the question, how much money have they printed? A lot. How fast have they been printing? Super fast. And how long are they going to print? Forever. Brings us to step number 5, the end game. How does this all end? Once you print enough money, you create inflation. It's impossible not to. And as that old saying goes, once you let the inflation genie out of the bottle, it's almost impossible to get her back in. When inflation gets out of hand, the Fed will lose control of the long end of the yield curve, meaning the 10-year and the 30-year will start to go up. This will crush asset prices, debt, and confidence, implode the economy. The Fed will freak out. They'll start to print more money to buy these bonds. But then that puts us into this negative feedback loop where the Fed is printing money. This is creating more inflation, making rates rise faster, destroying the economy, making that go down faster, which makes the Fed print even more. It gets really ugly really fast. Oh, but wait, there is more. We've got a wild card. Don't forget about MMT, modern monetary theory, where the politicians take this on as gospel. They start printing money like it's going out of style to paper over all of their problems, like the pension crisis, auto loans, student debt, Medicare for all, and bailing out all of these states and cities that are going to go bust. Now, it is very possible that we go into a deflationary spiral first, but at some point in time, we've got to get to this inflation negative feedback loop that's going to be our end game. It's very similar to Hotel California, where you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. That's what quantitative easing is. So, to answer our question, did the Fed just start the dollar collapse? My answer to that is no, they didn't. They actually started it in 2009 when this quantitative easing nonsense began. For more information like this, specifically on the recession 2020, check out this content right here, and I will see you on the next video.